Welcome to the EQ Podcast. Awesome, Don. You ready to do this?
I'm ready to do this.
Were
now
you able to watch
sent
the
me
movie?
some questions. Now, even before we do that, can I kind of, you can edit it and do whatever you want to with it, but kind of look back at the times, a little bit of the world back then in general?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, I think that, a lot of people, particularly that maybe are watching the church today, watching the world today in our country, don't realize what was going on in the 1960s anyway, because they weren't alive then. And so they're unaware of it. That was the backdrop of a great spiritual work that happened back then. But I was alive, of course, for that. And during that time, I was a junior in college when I got saved at the Billy Graham crusade. But at the time, though, to kind of put some things in perspective, the country was in tremendous chaos. At the time, when the Vietnam War is going on, there was tremendous anti-war things going on all over the country. There was Jane Fonda and all the marches that she could have going on. The Chicago 7 at the Democratic National Convention, and I don't know, a couple were killed or something. They burned up a lot of stuff then. And Kent State, the government killed, I don't know how many were killed at that, but a huge thing that happened at Kent State University, anti-war thing going on. There was a huge, racial thing going on. Martin Luther King, he was getting tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. I don't remember in some of their marches. He was trying to be peaceful, which by and large it was somewhat, but there was also the Black Panthers. There was the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army. Very political, hostile things going on, that some of them were very, very brutal things going on with it. There was also the feminist movement, Gloria Steinem, and all of these, radical things going on within women and the women's lib movement going on. The economy was in crisis. I think prime rate went up to close to 19.5% or something like that. I remember I was excited when I got a home loan for 9.5% and myself. But there was sit-ins that were going in all over the country, going on in state houses, city, congressional places, where they would literally go in massive numbers, just sit in the halls, sit in the offices. They wouldn't leave the offices of Congress people and senators, and trying to stop the government or force, things that they wanted. So there was all sorts of student marches and peace marches going on. There was, of course, Watergate, having a complete distrust in government with all of the things that happened with Richard Nixon having to step down. And of course, there's the sexual revolution that was going on. Drugs were everywhere. Timothy Leary, he was a professor at Harvard University, had this big thing on LSD and tune in, turn on, drop out, or something like that theme.
Yeah, that's what it was.
The whole thing of drugs, you got, this is, just how to mind altering things and do things right. And so the point is that at the time, all around, people were losing hope. Where do you go? There's, you look at it sociologically, you look at morally, you look at economically, you look at politically, militarily, you look at a war we didn't know how to get out of. And it was everywhere you went. But that's the backdrop for obviously an incredible outpouring of the Holy Spirit across the country. Now, Billy Graham, at that time, he'd been going since, I think, late 40s. But during this time is when he exploded. Wherever he went, he set records. By far, he's had, I think, 20,000 more people at the LA Coliseum than any other attended event in history. In the 60s, Billy Graham had. And wherever he went, it was huge. Campus Crusade for Christ was on virtually every campus, a major campus across the country. People were coming to Christ in huge numbers. There was Young Life. that virtually, I mean, many, and the high schools, things going on. Youth with a Mission came kind of out of nowhere with Lauren Cunningham and YWAM, and people signing up and going off and doing whatever they could. There was Navigators. That all these exploded. They were almost non-existent, many of these campus ministries and other things, until this was going on. And when that happened, it was when all the rest of the world's going on, there was a phenomenal thing, and it was largely youth oriented. A friend of mine named Stuart Briscoe is in heaven now, but he wrote a book that is called "Where Was the Church When the Youth Exploded?" And he was back east in Wisconsin, but they were across the country. There was this tremendous thing happening where the youth had just become disillusioned on virtually every front. And then, of course, during that time, there was Woodstock. But then Campus Crusade for Christ put on a thing in Dallas, their alternative, when they had over 100,000 came out to Christian folk music, going on there. Was huge. About that time, I went back to Colorado with Chuck. And there had to be 20 to 25,000, kind of like the Woodstock type of thing that Chuck spoke at. I just went with him. But it was incredible. You just looked at this mass of young people, very stripe and everything. They're just looking and hungry. It was unbelievable in a sense when you look at it. And during that time, anybody that was remotely preaching Christ, I don't care if it was the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, the Methodists, the Episcopalians, the Charismatic Catholics, they were growing. Their churches were growing. And the Bible Belt was exploding. Criswell had in Dallas First Baptist, he had over, I think, 40 some odd thousand people there. The Assemblies of God were massively growing. And growing so much as it kind of shifted, a major shift within them, where they started building Christian centers. Every town almost had a big old building. Here in San Jose, during that same period of time, the church here, was built. It's 150,000 square foot facility. It's incredible, but huge facility. There's another one here in town built during the same time that held 3,000. The First Baptist Church. There was another one down in Los Gatos. I think it holds about 2,500. They're all empty, but they couldn't build them fast enough or big enough here at the time when all this was going on, and so. It was, and then of course in Southern California, there was Jack Hayford, who was doing the Foursquare, doing incredibly. He had Pat Boone and all the different Hollywood people, but Promise Keepers. You remember those guys? They were filling up stadiums all across the country, and there was this tremendous hunger. And the PTL Club came out of nowhere, and then TV. Ended up and Jimmy Swaggart to Oral Roberts, Catherine Kuhlman, Robert Schuller had his Hour of Power and built his Crystal Cathedral. Melodyland exploded with Ralph Wilkerson, Teen Challenge, Cross and Switchblade, David Wilkerson. But then with that music, also across the country. Second chapter of Acts back east was huge, tremendous group. And Keith Green, Andre Crouch with, To God Be the Glory, a song that seemed like everybody in the country knew. And that was going on. Jack Hayford, Chuck Swindoll, his church exploded. He was at EV Free Church, but it just took off. John MacArthur. And of course, Jerry Falwell, his thing really exploded. They got Liberty going, the school back there. And then he started at the time, we got to turn the country around. He had the moral majority that he was building. And there figured, something, we're a moral people. We're the majority of our country are moral people. And but everything is... they were exploding. Well, at the time, I was I got saved during this time, but then I met Alan Redpath. Long story, make it short, though, I ended up going to England. And he invited me to come over there. He would take me kind of under his wing, and he taught in the school. I'd go to the little Bible school he taught in, which was life-changing for me. I had promised both my father and father-in-law that were upset with me that I was going off to a Bible school and not a seminary. And my father-in-law, I had very good friends, one of that he prayed with every week, and that were concerned for me if I did this. Wilbur Smith, Gleason Archer, Harold Lindsell, John Harold Ockengay, some guy, they were all professors at Fuller Seminary. It was once very fundamental, but they went south. And so but anyway, they thought, you've got to get a degree. Well, so I made a commitment that I'll go to England and then I'll come back and go to seminary. Well, I ended up coming back and going to Talbot. While I'm at Talbot, you had to be involved with some sort of assignment of helping a ministry somewhere. And at the time, Hollywood Presbyterian Church, of all things, Henrietta Mears, I don't know if you ever read her stuff. She was this incredible old lady at this time, but only was the college pastor there, and of all things, but Forest Home and these other places, she created them. But anyway, the Hollywood Press had this house ministry out in the San Fernando Valley, and here in Southern California. And a friend of mine who worked with them asked me to come and teach. So I went out and I ended up going all the time and teaching it once a week. And it was a big old house ministry. It had 100 to 125, just like the houses that we had at Costa Mesa. And so we are there. I'm going out there every week, and they're just all young people, just off this of every type, some hippies, some, everything, just like they were across the country kind of, and it was just packed out. And I remember them at times, that they went to some concerts down at the beach. And I said, what are they like? What are they doing? And because at the time, there was so many weird things, shepherding doctrine, manifested sons of God, that was going through all the youth stuff around the country. So anyway, I end up asking them about it. And they said, no, they're really good. So I didn't think much about it. Then my sister, she and her husband are going to this little church. And they said, would you come? So we really like it, but would you tell us what you think of it? So, okay. So we go to church one Sunday, and it's Chuck, Calvary. And I'll never forget, he's teaching on Jonah. And I still remember the message so well. He talks about, the typical thing of going down, 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 down. He ends up there and then throw me over. And then he's got to be in the belly of the fish for 3 days before he finally decides it's time to pray. And was this mess, how far down do you have to go before you're going to pray? And I mean, just a classic Chuck, but it was tremendous. And so afterwards, I'm walking out with my sister and her husband, my wife, and we're walking out at the door, and she wanted me to meet Chuck. And so she says, Chuck, this is my brother, Don McClure. Of course, my name's different because she's married. And he says, oh, hi, Don. Chuck says, oh, hi, Don. And how are you? But he said it like we knew each other. And I told him, I said, I don't think we know each other. I don't think I've met you. And he said, no, I didn't think we'd met. But there's some kids that have been coming down here from the Valley House Ministry out there. And I met them, and I got talking to them, and I was, what's you like? And they told me that the teacher was a guy named Don McClure. And so I just thought, that must be you. And I said, yeah. Chuck had a mind like this. I don't know what his IQ was, but it was off the charts. But anyway, so my personal involvement kind of started there. I was still doing these things in the Valley and still going to seminary, although frustrated with it, frankly. But I came back we just talked for just a couple minutes at the door. That was kind of it. And then I came back on Thursday night. This is the little chapel, sitting at the back. Just came by myself to check it out again. And I'm sitting like 3/4 of the way back or something. And Chuck is about to teach. And he said, by the way, but before I get into the word tonight, and he said, I'd like somebody just to share whatever's on his heart. Don McClure, would you come up? And I'm looking, is there enough? I mean, who in the world is going to ask a guy that walked out the door on Sunday to come and say something? I mean, I'm stunned, you know. And then why? No, that's you. So I go up and shared something. I have no idea what it was, but you can't remember that. But that was one of Chuck's greatest strengths. If he thought he saw something, to me, it was a huge risk taker. Yeah, I mean, to me, that was but that's one of the keys to, I think, what made Chuck, what he was doing. It's so effective is the fact that he looked at people. He thought he saw something there within it, but at any rate, then he asked me to come in and do something. I can't remember what else it was. And it was just, he wasn't even there for it, I don't think. But anyway, then they had a camp. And my sister, hey, you got to come to camp with us. So we go to a camp, weekend camp. Friday night, Chuck is teaching. And we're all sitting there, a great time of worship. And he teaches. And then we're all going to bed. And then here's the plan tomorrow, lays out the plan. And he's breakfast and such. And then he said, our first session then tomorrow, Don McClure is going to be teaching us. I'm sitting there. Nobody said it to me. Everybody's looking at me, my sister, my wife. What? You didn't tell us that. I said, I didn't know that. So I was up all night, panic, trying to, go, what am I going to do? And somehow or another, I put together something. But that was him. And so in the meantime, I'm still doing, in the seminary, still doing things in the valley, but coming down there whenever I kind of could. But I ended up talking to actually Romaine. He had just come on, hadn't been on staff long there himself. And he and I kind of really hit it off and enjoyed talking to him. He was very different than Chuck. He was a retired E9 Marine. That's the Master Sergeant, the highest you can go as an enlisted person. But anyway, and then as I would talk to Chuck a little bit more now and then, one day just asked, would you like to join me here? And I said, we'll come on staff. And again, you would think, well, you got, usually my degree was in business. You're used to sitting down they're going through interviews, going through, whatever it is in the business world. You fill out an application, you go through some department in here.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like it was not, I don't know what I thought it would be, but it just seemed. So we prayed about it for a couple of weeks because actually my parents were opposed to it. Both my dad and my father-in-law. And I was kind of a rebellious kid. But when I got saved, the Lord said, you submit, you listen, to authority. And I had really done that well in so many ways and thought and honored them. And God had honored their wisdom. But both my father and father-in-law they did not like it. They thought, they'd never been there. But what they'd heard of it was kind of a youth thing. And which actually that was not really accurate to me, but he and my father-in-law, I think he had like 5 degrees, something like that. He was from Mayo Clinic. He was a surgeon, and my father-in-law was a petroleum engineer and from USC, and his degree was in engineering. And they never would have had their careers had they not got their degrees. And I'll never forget my father-in-law said, Don, you got to realize whatever you're doing, you're building your resume. It'll always be on your resume, wherever you're going, whatever you do. And he said, could you imagine me as a surgeon in Mayo Clinic, and all the things that hang on your offices when you're a doctor. But could you imagine if there's something on my wall that said that I went down to South America and I studied under a voodoo doctor for 2 years? How would you like that? He says, that would be on my resume. And he says, this thing you're looking at here, it's concerning. And my father was the same way. But I said, you got to come. The guy, and a lot of people usually at the time were evaluating Calvary when I got around there on the youth. And basically the things that were going on in the concerts, we put the tent up in February of 72. And that's when there was a huge explosion those were kind of like youth night. That was definitely, the youth over, 80% were youth. There were still plenty of adults there, but I would say 75, 80% youth thing. But a lot of people don't realize at the same time, Chuck is packing the same facilities out 3 times on Sunday morning. Chuck was really the foundation of this. And that's something that I don't know that, Chuck, I'm sure he could care less then and care less now, but he had he not been who he was, there would be nothing today, without question. There was, that was it. There was all these other guys around. There was Brad Baker out in Riverside, a guy, he was kind of like a Catherine Kuhlman, dressed that way, ended up sadly dying of AIDS. And, but he had thousands out. I mean, there were so many characters and things that could get huge crowds because everybody in the country was hungry for something. But Calvary was Chuck. Well, but one of the things that with it. So when I came, and it's funny because I was never a hippie, and never. I grew up in just kind of a standard home, and the family and everything around it, and went to college, and I was a fraternity guy, button-down collar, wingtip shoes, press pants, I mean, that whole world of just the fraternity college thing. And here I come in when Chuck brought me, and I did not fit with the younger people so much. I didn't think, but that Chuck wanted me. But but by and large, though, a lot of people don't realize that by far the greater percentage, overwhelmingly, were adults. They were like, and when my dad came, and when my father-in-law, when they came down, they immediately, this became their home. They said, we've never heard the word like this. And they'd been in churches for many years, evangelical churches, but this was like, getting the word like this. It was just, in fact, my dad was sat on the board. I left in 75 to went to the Bible college. My folks came down in 75. Chuck brought him on the board. He was on the board with him for 30 years. My father-in-law was on like 12 years until he moved down with us. But but anyway, I know we got to probably get to your questions you got, but I think the core of a lot of things that were going on at the time is that there were so many things in the country. And that's what I'm really praying for is right now, our country has everything in it now in spades that there was in the 60s. Mm-hmm. It is worse on you pick one of those with the racial issues, you look at the sexual issues, you look at all the stuff with the trans stuff, you look at CRT, you just go right down the list. They make the 60s look like Sunday school. And, now you're just kind of praying, Lord, that's what excites me. I love our past. I love mine. I love everything about it. But if we're also looking and realizing that you just feel like, Lord, you're allowing this to happen. You raise up kings, you put them down. Why we got the president we've got now, why we got all these people in legislature, why we've got, people actually how do you have a human being, a woman, they're a doctor, sit in before the Senate, ask them, what is a woman? And she cannot describe it. Yep. Can't describe it. And then then somebody else says a man can get pregnant. And you're sitting there, you think, but the Bible says the last days, God will give people over to a strong delusion. I think there is a delusion coming over our country. It's unbelievable. Never before dreamed of in human history. This woman knew what a woman was all of her life. Grammar school, high school, college, graduate school, medical school, up till about a year ago. She knew what a woman was. Right. And yet to say, I don't know. Yeah. What has happened in politicians all over? A delusion. They're truly, are they just kind of, they're a coward. I think they're delusional myself. I think that there are so many other things that God is lining up to where men are calling evil good and good evil more than ever in our country. And so that's what excites me about the world in which we're in now. Now, in terms of some of the things one of the things, there's my bio you want, and how I got involved myself with Calvary. It was funny. I'll never forget one time I'm sitting around. There's Greg Laurie, and I think Mike McIntosh and Tom Sype. By the way, a lot of people, when the tent went up, Tom did Tuesday nights. Mike did Saturday nights, or was it? No. Tom did Saturday nights. Mike did, and they were packed. Thousands and came to the Lord during that period of time. Greg went out to Riverside, and that, of course, is history and took off. But to me, when one of the things you see things in the country where you just hope that there's kind of this spiritual hunger like God poured out in the 60s, and you realize he could do that anytime.
Yeah.
We've seen it. We were there for it. And so those are the similarities. One of your questions, what are the similarities between the world then and now? And in terms of Greg, it's like when I came, I was 24 and on staff. Greg is 6 years under me, so he was 18. And he always had energy, always has, always, foot tapping, something want to do. But at the time, I mean, you've seen the pictures of him, but I mean, he was a total, to the max, a Lonnie, disciple. I mean, we're talking hair, we're talking outfit. I'm sitting there looking at the Birkenstocks, everything. Lonnie had led him to the Lord, and Lonnie Frisbee. I've never. If there's one person in a sense I could never figure out or care to be honest with you. Not that I didn't like him, I just could never. For some reason, to me, not being a hippie and not being in that world at all myself and coming in, I just couldn't get it all a read on him, because I think with all that being said, he had a charisma like few people I've ever seen. There was something about Lonnie. He would get up and start talking, and a lot of his stuff was heretical. Chuck had to deal with it. And, but he had the kids that would come out. And with them, the kids brought their parents, and that, I think most of the congregation when I was, there was probably at least 75% adults and non-hippies. But the ones that were on the magazines, the one that everyone wanted to interview, the ones that all the press, and there was always, that's the photo shot that they wanted. And, but Lonnie was, he was immature. He was a character, but he had, I don't know if the zeal, passion, but a charisma, a natural charisma. Everybody, I think, when when I first got saved, I was following Hal Lindsey around, How to Lay Great Planet Earth. I mean, I'd listen to these guys, man, I wish I knew Greek and Hebrew. I wish I knew archaeology like that guy, or I wish I knew, whatever, like some speaker. But you look at Lonnie and I think, I don't get that guy, but yet he's got a charisma, and he had that, no doubt about it. But in the sense though, he could get up and just say, we've had a lot of music tonight. You've been great. We don't really have time for a message, but a lot of you people are here to give your life to Christ and get saved. Just get up and come down. That was his message. And they flocked forward. He'd sit there and say, wait a minute, what just happened? Type of a thing, or his message would be shorter, but so he was a character. He was only there maybe a little over a year and a half, maybe. And, anyway, he kind of definitely was, you might say, the youth pastor of it. Greg, on the other hand, though, to me, he was his mentor. He's a smart person. He's got a good intellect. He studies. And so he's kind of interesting that he was always kind of around. He was never actually on staff at Costa Mesa. I taught Friday night. Greg came and did worship. He wanted to sing. And he had a guitar. I can't remember if it was any good or not. But but he wanted zeal. He wanted to do something. In fact, Riverside, I was asked to go out there. Chuck, they had this huge thing going on with youth. And I went out and looked at it, came back and said, Chuck, Lonnie, I'm not Lonnie, Greg should do this. This is, and the rest of that is history. He came out and did it, and it took off. It was already, I can't remember what had happened. It's kind of got it started before Greg came. And, but anyway, Greg, because he was solid, because he's always focused, you're going to get the gospel, you're going to get it scripturally, you're going to get it straightforward. There's not going to be any question, what did he say when he's done saying it? And, he's always been very clear that way. So none of the other Lonnie stuff, that lasted long. Next, in fact, did I tell you this? I remember one time we're standing around and they would mock me. And all of them, Tom, Greg, Mike, we were good friends, but to me, they looked at me and they're always trying to fix me. They wanted to take me, dress me, and because they were Birkenstocks, bell bottom, tie dye, the hair, all of this stuff. And I'll never forget telling you, we got to fix you, I'll never forget, I'm looking at that. I told them, it's funny because I reminded them all several times, but I said to them, I want to make you guys a promise. I'll break your promise right now. And that is that I will never be like you, but you will be like me. And they are. If you wait long enough, your style will come back. But but it was funny because when I was there, here, like Children of the Day, and these were kind of the premier groups who would love it. Here, what happened with Calvary is, there was, all these different music groups. There was, what's the other huge music company that did bigger than Maranatha? It was huge. I imagine they still are.
Sparrow?
No, not so. I'll think of it in a minute when we hang up. If I hang up and call it, but Maranatha started, of course, at Costa Mesa, but there was Love Song, Children of the Day, The Way, Mustard Seed Faith, all these guys and gals, but the Karen Lafferty, just the list goes on and on. That had great things. Ernie and Debbie, well, actually, Ernie Rotino, Debbie Kern got married, but in art. So, but anyway, all these, but that was, I think the important thing to realize is that when you would look across the country and you look at what happened at the time, there was something huge going on, huge. And at the foundation of it was a country falling apart. And the cry right now, sometimes a lot of people, the cry is politics. We can get it fixed if we vote right. And I think it's realizing not going to work. And hopefully the church is going to realize on one hand, we're to be salt and light. We are to stand for righteousness. I believe we're to do all we can to protect our children, our community, or to speak to it. But at the same time, to realize, though, that I believe the Lord's coming soon. I believe he's coming very soon. And I believe when he comes, there will have been 6,000 years, the number of man, 6,000 years of man's attempt to rule himself. And at this point, they've all failed. Absolute failure. There's only one government system that is on its feeble little knees left, and that's Western democracy. And we're watching it go down. And I think because when the Lord comes, I don't think there'll be any society saying, Lord, if you'd have given us a little longer, we were almost got this fixed. We could have turned it around, the world. And I think, no, it'll be a universal realization. The millennial reign of Jesus Christ is the only hope. And that he establishes his government. Man cannot rule himself. And we're watching it, right around us, sadly, dissipate before our very eyes. But in terms of planting churches, because I've got to get back to this list. You got to know what I'm doing, but you could edit it, cut out whatever.
No, this is great.
90% of it. What?
No, this is great. You just keep going. We're gonna let you keep rolling.
Well, the what happened with me, it was funny. My personal thing is that I came here, and of course, the biggest thing was Chuck, obviously, to me. And but I had been to Bible school, but everything I got to realize, I didn't know anything till I actually fell in love with my wife, who grew up in an incredible Christian home, and the Bible was the center. Every day they read the Word and prayed, and she never rebelled from it. Always loved it. Then her dad also owned a home in a place called Mount Hermon. It's a Christian conference center outside of, there, San Jose and Santa Cruz. And he had a place there, and Jean spent her summers there working in the popcorn machine, housekeeping or whatever, but listening to all of the public, the godly guys around the country that came and had conferences for him. And she grew up in that. And so when we were falling in love, we'd go out and she'd tell me all these Bible characters. And that's what gave me really a hunger for the Bible. That's in the Bible. That's in the Bible. Wow. I didn't know anything. So we go to England, and then I listened to the Word, and I realized that, to me, because all I wanted to do was be an evangelist. Everything I'd been around, through Billy Graham's ministry. I was for 2 years on student staff with Campus Crusade for Christ. And, with them while I finished up college. And everything though was evangelism. I do conferences for Young Life. Everything's evangelism, because that was it. That's all I really knew. And but when I'm in England, I realized getting the Bible all day, this is unbelievable. And I thought, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to teach that book. I mean, I had no interest in teaching the book because I didn't know the book. Never really, even in all the evangelical circles I'd been around, I'd never really come across people that really taught the Bible simply, and I realized this is not rocket science. And then I come back, and here, next thing you know, that, I'm around Chuck. Chuck asked me, it's so funny because he asked me to do Friday night. Well, Sunday morning, Chuck had 3 services. Sunday night, Chuck taught. Monday night, Chuck taught. Tuesday night, we had Tom Stipe or Mike McIntosh. Wednesday night, there was couples and other things around. Thursday night, Chuck taught. Friday night, there was nothing. Saturday night, there was Maranatha concert again. Sunday night, Saturday night, men's prayer meeting too, and then Sunday night again. So the only thing that was nothing was Friday night. Chuck asked me, he said, would you like to take Friday night and teach? I said, yeah, and I'll do that. So anyway, I'm teaching Friday night. Now you got to realize every night of the week is packed. I mean, we're packed every night, overpacked. I'm doing Friday night. I had maybe 300, maybe 350. You would think if you just walked into the place and you knew anything else the other 6 nights, you think, what happened here? Is there a funeral going on? Whatever. They're just the deadest sort. But the thing was, then I'm just kind of teaching through. And actually, I had another Bible study that I taught, just a small home one, but Love Song and Children of the Day. They would come oftentimes to this if they're in town. And so we'd gotten to know them things, and they would stick their head in. And one time Chuck Gerard comes and he says, Don, we got to help you on Friday night. We'll just come and do music. We've talked to Children of the Day. We'll switch off. And when we're in town, we'll help them. We'll pack it, but it'll be, you got to do this. And what do you think? I said, well, let me think about it. So I go to Chuck. And I said, Chuck Gerard, Children of the Day, they want to help me out. There's nobody there. And I mean, at the time, who would ever look at 350 people and say there's nobody there? But if you were with everything else, you'd say nobody's there. Mm-hmm. It was nothing compared to everything else. It was quieter. I had one, person lead, just a cappella leading some things, and maybe a guitar, but that was it. And so I tell Chuck, these guys offered to do this. What do you think? And he said, what do you think? I said, well, Chuck, I'm just learning to teach. I've never taught any of this. Every time I teach, I'm teaching. I'm in Romans 1 and then I got to be in Romans. I've never taught Romans 2 yet. I hope nobody comes and asks me what's in this next chapter. I'm 24 years old.
Yeah.
And with it. And so here I'm actually out doing, in something. And he said, so what are you saying? I said, I don't know what to do with the crowd. I just want to learn to teach. And he said, good. I like that too. Just keep it the way it is. And so, but to me, I think helping people find out who they are. Chuck was very good at that. Instead of saying, oh, no, let's pack out another night, or something. It was like, no, and Chuck he would throw me and Chuck would leave. I'm 24 years old, 3 Sunday morning services on radio, and he'd have me do the services. And he was just this great risk taker, with it. And I think ministry is always that. But when people want to plant something, they want to do something, with it. And so I think whether you're planting a church, raising up leaders, to be able to look and take chances and with them and be able to know how the best you can to reel them in. Sometimes it doesn't work well. We used to say about Chuck, he gives you enough rope to get the job done or to get it done or hang yourself. He would just go for it. And sadly, there were some guys that couldn't handle it. They get burned and their life, wasn't what it should be. But one of the things that hit me, my degree was in business. And when I studied like General Motors, Ford, we had to study all these major corporations. Come to find, they're used to having, if they're risk takers, they'd have like 20% on the average of things that they shouldn't have done. Ford makes an Edsel, if you remember those, and the bombs on it, loses millions. Turn around, let's try something else. Do a Mustang, you got history. But they're all risky. General Motors called back a lot of it. But you just look and you think you've got something. And, and Paul you look at the list of people that he thought were with him, but having loved this world more, finding out after you've got the finest discipler on the planet, the missionary, awesome. And yet here Paul had guys that failed, burned along the way. But I think one of the things that when we started, because having churches, Mike went down to San Diego, and in no time he had like 19. Around I don't know how many are now, but within a couple of years, like 19 Calvaries came out of Mike in San Diego. And as people would go, Chuck really had this thing that he would bring out: Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. I'm sure you've heard the study on it. Mm-hmm. Letting the church spill out into the region, there and around. And very soon we had a couple hundred Calvaries in Southern California, but we were not having a huge impact in other places. And during that time, John Higgins, actually a thing had happened. Chuck sent me to Phoenix. Church of Christ went under, and Chuck asked me to go check it out, and they wanted to sell it to Calvary, and we ended up doing it. Brought John Higgins in, and that was the first Calvary Chapel outside of the state of California, many years ago in Phoenix. But that started out of that over the years. I think now there's probably 8 or 9 Calvaries in the immediate Phoenix. And then that became, again, the old story that Chuck would say, you're Jerusalem, you Judea, Samaria. But when you do, what happened when I came here to San Diego to San Jose, it was a long story. This actually was a building, a church. It was an Assembly of God. And long story, they had moral issues, legal issues, financial issues. They're being sued by their own congregation. They loaned them $3 million illegally, and then they couldn't pay even for the building. And it was going to be foreclosed on, and they were in that process. If they lost the building, the people would never get anything. So they had to sue their church to try to stop the foreclosure and force some sort of a sale to get whatever they could. And so they had approached Chuck, would Calvary take this thing over? And we need $3 million immediately. There's a total of $8.1 million in debt with their other loans. But the one to keep them out of court was $3 million. And Chuck said, would you like to go up to San Jose? And he tells me the whole story about the church and the problems and the splits and it, but big old facility. They used to have, most like 5,000 members. I don't know what it was anyway, but here there was less. There was like 300 left of them. And it was down to nothing. And they were, as divided and hurt, hopeless as you can imagine. But they're hanging in there, trying to get the money. Well, anyway, so he said, "Would you go?" He tells me this whole story. I said, "Chuck, you can't be serious." And he said, "I am." And he said, "We can't get anything going in the Bay Area. We've tried and tried and tried nothing." He said, "Maybe just, And so I said, "Chuck, we plant churches." I said, do you realize, Chuck, I'll never forget, we laughed like crazy about it. I said, there's a lot more new births on record than resurrections. This is a resurrection you're talking about. And he thought that was so funny, but it ended up, we'd never done anything like this. So, but it's funny. I don't know, Steve, what it was like for you up in Tri-Cities, whether you had a Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, or when you came there, people, who are you? Whether people look at you. It was,
who are you?
Yeah. Well, then the feeling, because here when I was in Southern California, I thought I was the church planter extraordinaire. I'd go help these things, put out, let the word get out. I'd have 200 or 300 first Sunday, with this thing. I'd go do it for a couple of weeks while somebody else would cover for me and see if we can inspire and get something going here. And I thought, man, I'm awesome. Planters is easy, stuff. And so when I came up here and nobody knew, I'm sitting one time in a car, a tire place, getting a tire fixed at a tire dealership. And I get talking to this guy, sharing with him. And then we end up having a great time of fellowship. And he says, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a pastor." "You are? Well, I want to come to your church." He was so nice. He said, "Where do you pastor?" I said, "Oh, it's Calvary Chapel." And he said, "Is that a Baptist? Calvary Baptist?" I said, "No." And he said, "No, I'm not." And so he said something else. And I said, "Have you ever heard of Chuck Smith?" And he said, "Any relation to Joseph?" And I said, "No. No, but that's when I realized I had spent years building on another man's works. Yeah. And, in Southern California, the ground had been plowed, watered, seeded. They were just waiting for somebody to start running the plow and harvesting it. It was so you see the Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, because I kind of took a big leap. Nobody. And then Chuck ended up getting on the radio and doing a lot of other things where, things took on a different thing. But then, Steve, it's like to go someplace and you try to say who you are and it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And exactly. So you're having to do it. You do it all.
Yeah.
It's, and that's the challenge. So I think when you're planting something, Chuck with his, he used to say, but I don't know how much we seriously realized how true it was. The whole Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria, then the other, Right. And I kind of went from, we leap over to where there's no recognition, with it. And now you just got to, it all works, but it just takes a whole lot longer.
Yeah. When I came up here, I was trying to figure out what I was going to call the church. And so I always liked Calvary Chapel, but, I knew Southern California and you could put up a Calvary Chapel sign and people would just come because of the name. And so I was like, I don't know if I want to do that because I'm just, I'm trading on Chuck's name and stuff. And when I got up here, nobody knew what a Calvary Chapel was. Yeah. And so it was really awesome because I've always loved the name. So, Don, I wanted to ask you, you covered what was going on in the country when the Jesus movement started. And you've talked about the similarities. What do you think are the differences between now and then? Anything that makes this like, I'm like you. I'm really hoping for God to move and just work in people's lives and have another Jesus movement. But do you see any dissimilarities between the two times?
I think it's much scarier Now, whether I was just young and dumb, at that time and didn't really realize, I don't think that I had a mind that wrapped in. You get to my age, our age, you see the internet, you see the world, you see things, and you realize all the things that people invest in or hope in or building towards that give them some sort of a foundation or hope of stability. And because I was so young and you don't think of stability or what's going on or, hey, we'll make it all, who cares? We're going to be fine or whatever you think. But at this point, when we're looking here from at the big picture, you look at China, you look at Taiwan, and you realize that this is something. In fact, it's interesting. Michael right now is just going into escrow on a Taiwanese church. And that here in town, to build for a Bible college. But and you realize with these people that they are now actually getting ready for what they believe will be a huge number of refugees because they're convinced China's coming and that there's going to be a war in Taiwan. They look at this, they're trying to get allies, they're trying to do it, but as a nation, and realizing there's not much to stop them now. And, really, and on one hand, we'll do maybe a lot of saber rattling and yelling and screaming and jumping up and down. I don't think this present administration or anybody around it has the will at all to do anything with China or really with Russia for that matter. I think that they just look at us and, Reagan did pretty good. Whether Trump seemed to be a pretty strong guy in this and, stood up to North Korea and things. But when you look here at the world and realize, are we really, and sit back, are we being set up for the end? To me, absolutely. Will God be merciful to us? One more time, who knows? I mean, everything, whether, God is just, again, I do believe that the Lord there's a strong delusion to have intelligent people around our leadership in our country, either to become such overwhelming cowards, overnight for fear of, fitting in with all of their cronies. But to say the things they're saying to you, I mean, we're not governors. We're looking at congressmen, senators who are afraid to define a wound, or to take a stand at all against this trans stuff where you're taking a human being. And to me, what we are watching here is Satan. There is, he knows he can't touch God. That's been settled a long time ago. The closest he can get to him is destroy his kids.
Right.
And destroy what he made, and that's man in his image. And now when you can destroy where man no longer has an image, he's no longer a male or a female. He no longer, we are so decadent. I don't know. I wish you just feel like their things are worse. And, at what point somebody there kind of just, you look at how World War II starts, and here there's what was it? What I'm trying to think of what country somebody was visiting, and it came from one and the Archduke of Austria or something like that.
Yeah, you're talking about World War One. Yeah.
World War One. I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
So he gets killed, and the next year with those two, and then another, and all of a sudden, you've got the entire world. All the allies are lining up, and but we are. I don't. That's who knows that one. You just say, Lord, you'd sure love to think that He could one more time. Why He was merciful to us in the 60s, but you look back, and that's the important thing to me when I think that we look at. I mean, when you look at things that were so simple, and I don't take away anything from Greg from that, because Greg was smart. He was not simple, but I mean, as simple as a 19-year-old guy going out to Riverside and beginning to preach. And that's kind of this, the movie is Greg's story, but there's also thousands of that story,
right,
in different areas at the time. And that's what America needs, now. And but Greg did it. And went out, and to realize, if you really look at the time, you look at the season, you look at something that was so unique, you'd love to see something like the coming out of that, movie where people begin to realize, I could do that.
Mhm.
I could do that. I want to go. I want to try it. I want to risk something. And, whether that would be the thrilling thing. And because, but you'd love to see, obviously the Lord raised it up. When you look at all of these ministries, all these organizations, from Christian business, remember CBMC? I don't know if you ever had them around you, Christian Businessmen's Committee.
Mhm.
And they were huge things all over. I mean, all these different, anybody could find the gospel anywhere, and it was happening somewhere. And now it's sparse, and whether at some point, obviously the Holy Spirit was poured out in the 60s. No other way to look at it. There's no person that has any ownership to it. Billy Graham didn't own it. Bill Bride didn't own it. Chuck didn't own it. They just did what they're called to do. Yeah. And collectively, it was unbelievable what God did when you got hundreds of people feeling moved to step out and take a risk and do something like this. And you realize that out of that, I think God gave grace to our country for another generation. Yeah. But now, just like the children of Israel, the book of Judges, so nobody remembers. Right. Nobody looks back. And now the same things that got us into trouble before, we got it is worse than ever.
Yep. One of the things that I got saved in 75. And so it was during some of the time of some of the things that you were talking about. But one of the things that really struck me about Calvary, because I got saved in Calvary, is that it was never about Calvary. It was always about Jesus.
Yeah.
So, just the whole one-way thing, there are things that
everybody going around with their finger up in the air.
Yeah, exactly. And
had
I thought that's what church was about.
Everybody had a bumper sticker with Jesus on it almost. Yeah. Everybody could go honk if you love Jesus.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It was just, and they weren't anybody. I'm not a Baptist. I'm not a Pentecostal. I'm not anything. I'm just a Jesus person.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that you were talking about, guys going out, and nowadays it seems like when guys go out to do churches, what they're looking for is they're looking for support, and they're looking for almost a business plan and that kind of situation. And it just wasn't like that with a lot of these guys. Yeah, it
wasn't. Chuck would. We would have a joke. Did he send you out? Did he fling you out? Did he throw you out? What was it that caused you to grow out? But it was never what he paid you to go out. No, I don't do that. But at the same time, see, Chuck, I mean, we've all heard his stories, and I used to kid him about, how he and Kay would go down to the park and, and God would, probably somebody would come up and give him $1 or things that he would talk about. But on how a lot of people don't realize Chuck was in his early 40s before this happened. Yeah. He worked 2 jobs in markets. He worked like crazy. And supporting himself, supporting his family and the church. Church gave him everything they had, but that, was a few bucks. There's the little churches, but he so loved doing it, so loved teaching. That's just was life. And so he really felt that was the foundation of what he was. And if you bypass the process of faith in the very person that's going to teach it, you will now destroy it. And that the fundamental quality of a man that's going to go out, and minister, they're the gospel, is that does he himself believe these and has he experienced these truths? Mm-hmm. And the most exciting times in our lives were here we were, when I was at Costa Mesa. Chuck did not pay well. It's embarrassing to say what it was, so I won't say what it was. But the funny thing about it is that it was a time where I knew, because I'm pressed. We're just, eating all this, macaroni, everything, all the stories you hear, we did it. And that's how it was. One time I was kidding Chuck and I said, Chuck, when you were a pastor in all those years, your congregations, they gave you everything that they had, didn't they? He said, yeah, they were. They were really wonderful. Wasn't enough. And I said, I like that. I like that formula. How about if Calvary Costa Mesa gives me everything that you got, and if I don't need it all, I'll let you know. We laughed about it. But in the sense though of where, but Chuck, if he looked at somebody and if he saw somebody that he believed the word, he believed the Lord, that there's something in looking in his eyes, it's that person. When he would have guys that came along and were looking for a job description, what's my financial package, retirement plan, vacations, health, some goodbye. That's to me, he really felt, and I think, and I'm in agreement on it. Always at the time, I don't know how much I agreed on it, but it was funny. My father-in-law, who loved the church, couldn't get enough of it. All the time, like every month or two, I'd get a check from Chuck and the benevolent fund, not my paycheck, for $100, $200. I thought, why did I need to put on my paycheck? What's it? I mean, why, that was odd. That went, for a year or two. It wasn't until years later I found out that my father-in-law, who Chuck loved and he loved my Chuck. He wouldn't, loved Chuck. He wouldn't love the teaching. But my father-in-law, he would give Chuck a check, and he'd ask if anonymously that could be given to me because he knew we needed it. And my father-in-law, that was his way of saying, Chuck, you're starving my kids, or something, or something. So it was really one there that he was upset. He thought labor is worthy of his hire, and Chuck wasn't doing that.
Yeah. To
me, I mean, it was a tough time, but it was it really came down, who do I serve?
Yeah.
Who do I serve? I served here in San Jose for 11 years. The first 3 years I was here, I didn't think I was prepared to go for like 3 months. I'd set it all up financially. I could all be all right. And I get up here. We lived, here we are out of the food bank, and I'd had a home before. I had check on the 1st and the 15th. Had vacation time, had a car. Had a credit card, whatever, just you do as a pastor, leading flock. I come up here, all that's gone. And we're eating out of the food bank. With the church, we actually had a food bank in it, and their pastor is eating out of the food bank and to feed his family. That went on for 3 years. After that, then, of course, things turned around. And by the time I was here 11 years when I left, we actually had reduced, it was 8.1 million. I was talking to Britt, one of the guys, last night, and it was somewhere around 4 to 5. We'd reduced it down, but it was always a monkey on your back. And but we had over $1 million in the bank. And the board came to me and said, we owe you 3 years salary. And we've got it. And I said, you don't owe me anything. I don't owe me anything at all. And I said, we do too. A labor is worthy of his hire. And I said, and I am. I said, well, what you don't know? See, I ended up having to sell my home. Well, I had to sell it anyway because I moved up here. Selling my home, and that helped me live. And I had all these things that took care of me for 3 years out of my own wallet. Had to sell I had a retirement plan, sold that. And so whatever I had to keep food, but it never said a word to anybody about it. Nobody knew except for Gene. And, but here, during that process, Clinton came up with a loan. I don't know, a loan that you could get that required, if you could put 30% down on the house, you didn't have to qualify. Well, I couldn't qualify for anything because that no job technically. But here I'd had a retirement thing. I'd pull that out of there. I put that down. And then actually Steve Mays, he would come up here and visit me and console me a lot, teach or do something. And we're talking about it. I had everything but $15,000 short of being able to do a house we looked at. Steve Mays calls up Ed Ray in Redlands. And I didn't know anything about it, but we had talked. And a couple of days later, I get $15,000, $7,500 for each as a gift, and get the house. So we got the house. At that time, then we ended up, when we left, and I sold that home. I had far more money than I'd ever had in my life. And I told the board, I said, you guys feel like, yeah. I said, I don't work for you. I've never felt like I worked for you. You didn't call me in the ministry.
Hmm.
The Lord did. And he is taking care of me better than you ever will. He has his other ways of doing it. I'm leaving town far richer than I came. And there's no way I could take that. And to me, I think that's where authority comes from in ministry life. And when you just do what you have to do to feed and lead, and you watch, you step back, and there is where at the end of the day, you're the most blessed guy in the world. Then somebody else said, "Wow, that's a blessing." And I said, "You have no idea what a blessing it is, because when it happens to you, instead of reading about it, and that's what I don't ever want to deprive somebody of, and that of having that, in fact, even when I was up here, I'll never forget one time somebody asked me how I'm doing. And I said, well, I'll tell you, I said, I'm learning that a lot of things that I've been preaching for 20 years, I'm finding out they're actually true.
Yeah.
And, but I think, so a lot of what you're preaching ministry, we got to tell you to speak the truth, the word, the best you can, but you haven't needed to experience that until you've gone through all these things that we went through with staff and leadership and things that I was never used to. Because when you have a change, and you've got to change leadership, got to move things, get it into where that you're on the same foundation. And in all of my ministry, all of it, I never fired anybody, never had a church split, never had a board split. I had one board member I lost who committed adultery, and he came to me, and before I knew about it. And to me, but only I get here, and all of a sudden you've got a whole different world and a whole different set of trials that I'd never kind of known before, because I had harmony. I had my issues a lot were raising my kids, those ages and things. But the thing is that above all else, you look at Paul and his credentials, were his sufferings. That's what gave him the authority to say everything he said. And you realize, who's going to contradict that guy, and say it doesn't work, not true, when he's the living epistle of it, so anyway, I don't know if I've got all these, with the.
No, it was great, Don. I think that you nailed every question we had thoroughly, and we enjoyed it. Me and Steve were just sitting here smiling. Our producer.
Well, I hope you got a good edit department.
No, we'll just play the tape.
No, we're just putting it on. It's going to be great, Don. That was just really, really good for, I think, just a number of people in ministries. So
yeah.
Well, what you guys have done up there, I mean, it's something that now more and more, the rest of Calvary Chapel is beginning to hear. And you guys were born. So, I mean, in some ways, Wayne Taylor up there, and I love Wayne. I counseled Kathy. She went to Bible college. I counseled them before they got married, and we were very good friends, but for many years. And but you came into a world with adversity, with splits, confusion. And those are the things, those are good. I mean, on one hand, you don't wish them on anybody, but you do on everybody in the sense, because what comes out at the end when one day you realize, well, we've been there and we've done that and we're victorious. Mm-hmm. And the witness is solid. There maybe in the people that wanted to go where they wanted to go have gone, and hopefully they're happy and whatever else. But now you get a whole new regional understanding in one of the troubled areas of the movement, and to see that harmony and to see that fellowship and worship. And for years, I, at least because of my role, I guess, a lot of email, a lot of stuff gets stuffed in mine, and a lot of stuff was the confusion of up in that region, and I don't get any of that anymore. And realize there's people that have settled, and they got leadership. They're not looking to say, well, what happened to our region? They know it's doing great. So it is. So that's the neat thing. And you just go through it. And God just gave you some new kids to raise and work with. Were adopted over, and those that wanted to go on, all right. Yeah. And then some of them come, walking back. We've had so many that kind of decided to do something. Next thing you know, they're back. Ron, can we come back? Of course you can. That's one of the things, Chuck. One time I felt so responsible, terribly responsible for the vineyards, because John Wimber had been with me for a year before any of this. And then next thing you know, they wanted to start a church, and Chuck said, do it. And I said, I don't know. He's not the solid guy in the word. Yeah, he'll be fine. So we did it. Calvary Chapel of Yorba Linda, and my own brother, Calvary Chapel of Whittier, both of them. But they were longtime friends before. Well, then when they decided to do the vineyard, I mean, that cut to the quickest. 43 Calvary Chapels went with them when they did that. And to me, this was somebody I just felt terrible, but I'll never forget Chuck. I mean, and he knew what I was going through. He said, Don, I don't feel bad. I said, well, I do. You didn't do it. I did it. But actually Chuck did it too, because, he told me to do it as well. He said, go ahead and do it. But anyway, so when they went off, and he said, Don, he said, number one, I don't own Calvary Chapel. It's not mine. It's not ours, not anybody's, it's the Lord's. And he can do with it whatever he wants, number one. Number two, he said, I've found, myself, through the years, there's just some people that you're never going to be happy. Mm-hmm. They'll always be a little disgruntled on what they think leadership should be or what's going on, and it's not happening for them, or it's not happening for them here, or something like that. And he said, and he says, and every once in a while, a door of opportunity out comes up, and a bunch of them will walk out that door. They don't know where they're going. They don't know if it'll work. They just know where they're happy, where they are. I'm not happy. So here, let's try that door. People seem happy going through it. And he said, so you let them go. And he said, and if they're happy, then fine. Then great, go do it. I don't care. And he says, but then if later on they're unhappy and realize what did I do that for, and they come and say, can I come back? He said, of course you can. We'd love to have you back. And he said, so you bless them when they're going out, you bless them when they're going in, because they're still your family. And, but he had so many things about him that he really didn't put in books and things, but that you realize, how they worked their way out. So anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah. Again, thanks so much, Don. I appreciate you hanging out with us. It's been a huge blessing. We'll hope to have you on again, and down the road, we'll call you up, and I'm sure we have tons more questions for you. So,
well, you can talk to me about women. You ever want to do that? That's a long conversation. No, the other day I was just speaking somewhere, and I mentioned on how in Congress that somebody doesn't know what a woman is. This doctor does not know what a woman is. I said, now, mind you, I do understand that. I've been married 54 years, and I still don't know either, but I fundamentally know what I'm dealing with. No, but anyway. All right, you guys.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Bye, Don. Good to
appreciate
see you,
you. God bless you.
Okay, you too.
The EQ podcast is here as a resource for our listeners. Check us out at eqministry.com. On our website, you'll find a variety of helpful tools, including past ministry conferences and a contact form to seek out help or counsel from seasoned Calvary pastors who want to encourage you in your serving or answer your ministry-related questions. Until next time, God bless.